Hello.
Hello.
How you doing?
I'm doing good. Nice to put a face to the voice I've heard a few times on the podcast.
Oh yeah, thank you. How are you? It's good to meet you.
I'm doing good. Just enjoying the fall weather in Illinois.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous day here today.
Oh, I wish I was out there enjoying it.
Yeah, it's this is the time to go around the battlefield and explore and everything.
Now, out there, are the colors changing in the
Yeah,
leaves?
they're starting to. They're not very brilliant yet, but they're starting to head towards the brown and orange, red.
Nice.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty good.
Nice. I know I was out there, I think, last year during the summer, and it was my first trip to East Calvary Field.
Okay.
And, for an important role it played on day 3, it doesn't get a lot of traffic.
No, it doesn't. It's kind of out there, and it's also, unless you're coming from Route 30, it's kind of dangerous to get in there. It's when you're going down the Hanover Road, it's kind of tricky.
Yeah, I asked the National Park guys there in the visitor center how to get there, and he gave me clear instructions.
Did he send you out the Hanover Road, or did he send you out the whatchamacallit? The Hanover Road.
I think I went down Hanover and made a left, like a real sharp left.
Okay.
And then followed the signs from there.
Yeah. The left kind of sneaks up on you, and then, you got to.
Yeah, I had my GPS going too, so I could find it.
Yeah, that's the way to go. Scott, pronounce your last name so I don't mess it up.
Klonowski.
Klonowski, that's what I thought. All right.
Yeah, I have seen this thing butchered since I was 8.
Well, it was put in my calendar, I think, as Kolonowski.
Yeah, I've seen that one. I've seen. I was a Boy Scout, and they actually spelled it Kolonowski.
Yeah. And oh no, I'm sorry, it was put in correctly. Klonowski.
Yeah, I just kind of go, okay, whatever.
Yeah. I know. I grew up in North Jersey, and there were a lot of. That's Polish, right? Or is that?
It's Polish. My stepdad was Polish. So.
Yeah. So I recognize it as such an. I know. Well, those are tricky names to pronounce sometimes. So I'm going to ask him.
Yeah, it's I'm 60 miles south of Chicago, so it still gets to be a bit of a problem.
Yeah. Really, even out there?
Yeah. I mean, my small town, we're known for Jack Sikma, the NBA player for the Sonics.
Okay.
He went to high school here.
All right.
So, we get a lot of people, especially when the Bears used to train down here at Olivet. They would, some would get it, some wouldn't. I just kind of shrug and go, yeah, okay, whatever.
Olivet. Yeah. I actually, in my early 20s, I had a girlfriend who went to Olivet.
It's still there,
yeah.
Buying up property all over the place.
Is it?
It's turning a lot of apartment buildings in Bourbonnais into dorms.
Bourbonnais, that's where she was from. Bourbonnais, yeah. Or Bourbonnais in Kankakee County, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
We are at the very southern edge of the county. I can go 3 minutes outside of town and be in Iroquois County.
Okay. Yeah, I remember she was saying there's a lot of back then there were a lot of cornfields.
Still is.
Oh, okay. Good.
Corn and soybean.
Corn and soybean. That seems to be all it is around here too. Corn and soy.
I noticed that on my one of my visits. I mean, beautiful country. I was hoping to get out there this year to see the Thaddeus Stevens Museum.
Yeah, on Chambersburg Street.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just read a bio on Thaddeus.
Yeah, the guy who runs that has been on the show a bunch of times, and he's Ross Hetrick is his name. He is obsessed with Thaddeus Stevens, and he's behind the statue that was put up. I mean, he almost single-handedly is making sure that nobody forgets his name, and it's impressive.
I know, was it going down Chambersburg? There's a road sign that kind of says, he had a steel work there, or steel plant.
Yeah, out in oh God, it just escaped my brain.
Right, it's past the first shot marker.
Yeah, it's up in the mountains. It's why the hell can't I remember? This has been happening to me all day. Like simple words or things that I've said a million times have just not been recallable.
And then you have the marker there in downtown that said he had a house there.
Yeah, I don't know if that house is where he lived. He owned a bunch of properties that he leased out or rented out. The Lee's headquarters, Mrs. Thompson's house, it's known as. He owned that, and he had purchased it, I believe, for Mrs. Thompson. I think she was living in it. Her husband had, I think, died or in other ways left her unable to support herself, and he had, I guess, felt bad. And he purchased it, and I don't know if he charged her a nominal fee for rent or if he just said you can stay here, until you pass on. So he owned a lot of properties, and it is driving me. Caledonia Ironworks. That's what it was. That's where it is. God, that was going to drive me nuts.
Lancaster has a house of his.
Yeah, I think he lived in Lancaster. I think he lived here for a little bit, but I don't know if the house you're talking about. You're talking about the old log cabin?
There's a marker right down by the Irish store there on the Chambersburg Pike in downtown.
That actually, oh God, there's so many stories to remember. This is why I'm not going to be a guide. It's too much to remember. There, so the Thaddeus Stevens Museum, is on Chambersburg Street, and I almost feel like saying that they were fortunate enough to find the building that he lived in, but it actually I think might be the building across the street from the museum that was his. Yeah, there's something coming back to me there. I'm sorry, I hear so many things on a daily basis that I can't keep track of anything anymore.
It happens. I'm studying for my master's through Norwich University up in Vermont. And I've spent the past 2.5 years just immersed in Madison and states' rights and state sovereignty.
It's a lot.
It is.
Yeah.
And I wanted to get, my wheelhouse is the Civil War. My great-great-grandfather fought at Philippi.
Okay, West Virginia.
Yeah, Irish descent, Irish immigrant, had just came over in 47 with his family. One of my cousins actually has his pension records.
Okay.
And he enlisted in Philadelphia. So he was with I think it was the 1st West Virginia Rifles.
Okay.
I think it was the unit. He did his 3 months and left.
Smart.
Yeah. He did his 3 months. He saw engagement there at Philippi. Rest of the time he's garden trains. Did his 3 months and said, I'm going to Illinois.
Smart again.
Yeah, I think from what we can figure, it was probably the Homestead Act.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, good. He did his service, and then it's time to move on and look to his own interests.
Yeah, and the family's been here in Kankakee County since.
Okay.
I mean, we've spread throughout the Kankakee, and I think the next one over is Ford. But I mean, for the most part, the family stayed here, and most of them, when you get down to like my grandfather's generation, one of his brothers went to Minnesota. Met his wife because he got into an auto accident.
What did he hit her?
No, she was his nurse taking care of him.
Oh, the old Florence Henderson syndrome. I mean, Florence Nightingale.
Florence Nightingale, yeah. Yeah, Florence Henderson.
Although everybody had a crush on her too, I guess.
I don't know. I was more for Jan.
Oh yeah, you like Jan, huh?
Well, that troubled middle child, man. She,
Yeah,
you know, she,
yeah, I guess that's true. Marcia wasn't really all that.
no, Cindy was too much of a tattletale.
Yeah, she was too young too.
You know,
I
and that
was,
that
yeah.
troubled middle girl. You know, you may love her, but you're palming a blade at night just to make sure she
Amen.
doesn't
Amen.
shave your head.
So, how did you get in touch with us to come on the show?
My friend Tim Scott, um, listens to you guys, and he listens to my show. Scotty J presents the Civil War,
Okay.
and he's like, you know a lot about the war. You should go on addressing Gettysburg and talk with them for a little bit.
Okay, good.
And I was like, yeah, do I really want to? And he's like, hey, if you make an appearance, in a weird way, you can draw listeners or whatever. And I'm like, oh, I'll give it a shot.
Okay. Did you bring your clown wig, or what are you gonna do that's weird?
um, I will. I don't know. I got like when I'm not doing everything, I'm trying to learn, or I'm teaching myself stop motion animation.
Oh, that I did that. I actually I taught a summer camp. It was a film summer camp, and I was one of the counselors for a summer, and it was a rewarding experience, but I wouldn't do it again.
Yeah, I mean,
But we did that. We did the stop action animation, and it's pretty cool once it's done, but it's a
right.
process.
Yeah, because when I was studying for my bachelor's in history, I took film courses too.
Okay.
So the idea was to like be a documentarian, kind, because we all seen Ken Burns's Civil War,
Sure, we have.
but we need, and I agree with a lot of historians out there, we need an updated version.
Yeah.
It gets rough because I'm not taking anything away from Ken Burns. It was a great series.
Yes.
But it was heavily lost cause influenced.
Yes.
Especially putting into the national audience that Gettysburg was fought over shoes.
Yeah, and the first day was a skirmish compared to the other two.
Right. Yeah. So I wanted to do new documentaries. And so that kind of started my film studies, and then I got into history because my grandmother wanted to be a historian, but she was like in the Depression era.
Okay.
And my great grandfather thought that teaching wasn't a dignified position for women.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
I thought that attitude had kind of gone by the wayside by the mid 1800s.
No, I don't really know much about my great grandparents on my grandma's side.
Uh-huh.
They had all died by the time I came around. But he was old school. He was like, no daughter of mine's going to be a teacher. And I guess she was the rebellious one out of her sisters because she was wearing slacks and just
okay. Yeah.
being all types of rebellious. So she eventually went to.
Was she the middle daughter?
I think she was.
There you go.
Yeah, there was my Aunt May and my Aunt Ruth. And, my Aunt Ruth, farmer's wife out here in Kankakee County. She spent all of her years on the farm. Aunt May lived in town with her husband. Never knew what they did because by the time I came around, they were all retired.
Yeah.
But I mean, I spent a lot of time with them. I heard their stories about, they could recall with clarity where they were when Pearl Harbor was bombed.
Yeah, right.
So, I got that from that love of history. And my grandmother would always take me to historical places on summer trips.
Yeah, we did a lot of that, the historical places. And
Yeah.
That helps. I was just talking to somebody today, and he was wondering why young kids aren't interested in history, and I said it's the parents' fault. The parents aren't taking them these places. That's I said, that's how you got interested in it. That's how I got interested in it. That's how half the audience that I hear from says that they got interested in it. It's all their parents. I don't know why parents stopped parenting, but they did. And then they're wondering why the kids are monsters. It's like,
yeah,
really?
I mean, my son, he's 22 now. He's been with me to Gettysburg 3 times.
Good.
The
Does he
last
like
time
it?
he loves it. We did a ghost tour.
Okay. Yeah.
Kind of check out the niche market,
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, look, I don't like the ghost tours. I mean, I don't care about the ghost tours existing. Either way, I don't like that people only come here for the ghost tour, but I see the value in the ghost tour in that if you're not really interested in coming here, but you are interested in a ghost tour here,
right,
and it gets you exposed to the place and the history, maybe, just maybe, you might actually become interested in the real, actual history. And so I think they're an asset, but I don't know.
We did the orphanage.
Oh, yeah, that's a popular one.
Yeah, I know I came through for a day last year and I did it was by myself. I was coming back from Jersey seeing a friend. And I went to the Jenny Wade house on my own.
Okay.
Loved it. And the only reason why I remember her is because my high school history teacher.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Because she was the only civilian.
Right. She was teaching the Civil War, and we were talking about Gettysburg, and she mentions Jenny Wade, and I'm 18, and I'm like, why didn't she evacuate like everyone else? But then now, reading about the war, they, really didn't have time to evacuate. It was like the army was right there. They were stuck.
Yeah, this is actually a great argument that I like to have around here with people because, you know who Tim Smith is?
I've heard of him.
Yeah.
Is he one of the guides?
He's a guide. He works for the Adams County Historical Society as their chief historian. And I've known Tim like 20 years. And, every once in a while when we talk about Jenny Wade, he loves the Jenny Wade story. And Tim is a guy, he's very much a guy who likes to be a contrarian sometimes. And it always surprises me that of all the things he likes to question and dispel, he never seems to have ever questioned the Jenny Wade story at all. And I'm like, wait a second, like this doesn't make any sense to me. You're telling me that at no point in time could they figure out a way to at least, run up a flag of truce and say, hey, we've got a woman who just delivered a baby and a baby in this house and other women, can we please have a ceasefire until we can safely move them to the rear? Right. No one ever thought of that. No one ever tried to do that. It's not unheard of. It's not like there hasn't been a white flag asking for a ceasefire for some silly little thing like that. That never happened. And then then to find out that there was a man in the house the whole time. I'm like, what the hell is this guy doing? Like, I'd be busting a hole through the wall trying to get out the other side of the house, the safe side of the house. Yeah. And then when I would get there, I'd be yelling to the soldiers. I'm like, hey, can you do something about this? But everybody just, when I ask these questions, which to me are like common sense questions, they look at me like I've got 4 heads and I'm speaking Greek. Like, I don't understand it.
Wasn't it she had a friend in both armies on the field?
Yeah, so there were 2 boys who grew up here that ended up on both sides of there were actually like I believe it was 6 Gettysburg born Confederates. Oh, wow. And the reason for that number of them is because either all or a good chunk of them worked for C.W. Hoffman, who was a carriage maker. And he had a business here. And in the 1850s, he realizes that most of his clientele was in Virginia. So why not move to Virginia? So he moved to Shepherdstown, Virginia. And he said to the boys who worked for him, hey, I'm moving down here. I'm going to need help. If you're willing to come, you have a job. And so the guys are like, yeah, okay. So they go down and they join the local militia. And then the war breaks out. And of course, what are you going to do? And so a good chunk of them sign up and end up here. What's interesting to so many people and curious, I guess, to so many people is that No one seemed to run any of these guys up the chain of command to Lee as a guide or some kind of,
Right.
But no, they didn't. Wesley Culp is one of the guys you're thinking of.
Yeah.
He died somewhere around the Culp's Hill or maybe Wolf's Hill area. Or it could have been out on, I guess, Brinkerhoff's. They don't really know exactly where he died. And what was the other guy? Jack Skelly. He wasn't here. He was in the 87th Pennsylvania. He was down at the Second Battle of Winchester, and he was badly wounded. And as the story goes, Wesley, as the Confederates were sweeping over the field, Wesley found him and talked to him. And supposedly he had given Wesley messages, if you ever get home, yada, yada, yada. And as fate would have it, Wesley would get home. And he went and visited Mrs. Skelly when they got into town. And but we don't know what was really said in the conversation. We don't know what the message was. And the interesting thing, now Jenny and Jack had a little love affair going on.
Right.
And
that's what I've been hearing.
Yeah. And so for the longest time, that was just kind of speculated about. But then, I don't know, in the last 20 years or so, the Skelly family had found old letters between Jack and Jenny. And, well, I guess these would have been from Jenny to Jack.
Right.
And what's funny was Jack's brother, I believe it was Daniel, had gone through and, I guess, taken a razor and sliced out certain parts. And then he would write an annotation, something to the effect of, normal boyfriend and girlfriend stuff that no one needs to hear or read. So, but there are some things he left in that seem to be references to maybe sex or, that there was something more going on between them. And then there are letters from Jack while he was in the service to his mother, where his mother was basically saying, Jenny's a slut. She's running around with all the boys in town. And he wrote back to his mother and he said, I asked Jenny about this and her answer satisfies me, and I would appreciate it if you stop engaging in that kind of talk about her. So there was most likely a relationship between the two, but we don't know. People like to think that, Jack had given his dying love to what's his name? Wesley Culp to bring home to Jenny, but we don't really know.
Because I know when I did the tour, I was standing in the kitchen area and I was right in front of the table she was killed at.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I'm going to move over here real quick.
It is kind of weird, right? To stand there.
I did the tour, went upstairs, went through the hole, came down. I got scared by that dummy in the basement.
Oh, yeah, that's creepy.
Because I'm the only one going down. I walk in and see, I'm like, oh, God, they brought her body. Oh, no, it's a dummy.
Yeah.
Adding some authenticity here, guys. I like it.
Yeah, it's a fascinating. We did an episode a few years ago. If you go, it's an Ask a Gettysburg guide. It's about Jenny Wade or whatever. And we did it. We recorded it. It's not a video. It's just audio. But we recorded it sitting out in front of the Jenny Wade house. With Tim Smith and with Cindy Small, who wrote a book about Jenny. And that's where that's the first time I realized that my common sense questions just fall on deaf ears, because I asked these questions on the show expecting the historians in the group to really dive into them. And they just looked at me like, what are you talking about, crazy man? And I'm like, what are you talking about? But whatever.
It's weird.
It is weird.
They think the shot came from the Farnsworth house, but it doesn't measure up right.
No, I mean, look, there's guys with guns everywhere firing in that direction. And that bullet hole, I mean, I don't know if this matters. I'm not a ballistics expert, but the external or exterior bullet hole has been, it's not its original size. You can't get, because people put their ring fingers into it and it's been worn away. It's like, to me, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe they could still figure it out with that. And then there's the internal door or the interior door. I don't know why I keep saying that. the interior door with another hole in it. I don't
Yeah.
know how many times that's been fingered, but there's it came from somewhere in that direction, and that's enough for me.
Yeah. It just, because the second time I went there, my ex-girlfriend, we brought my son and her daughter, and we left them alone at the hotel, and we're like, just behave, please. Don't kill each other.
Right.
And we're walking down Baltimore. We parked down by the Jenny Wade house, went up one side, came down the other. And there's a sign there says, well, this person found, such and such here, and took them in wounded, took them in the heel or whatever. And she always thought that the battle was just like south of town. I'm like, no, they had to come through town on day one to get set up on the position. So yeah, there was fighting within the town. And then she saw the bullets on the Farnsworth house and the Jenny Wade house, and she was like, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Look, it's amazing.
Yeah,
Beautiful. One of the places I would like to live after the Masters.
Well, it's a great place to live. I would just recommend to you, if you're going to do that, the best advice I can give is rent for a year or two before you decide to buy, if you're looking to buy, because it's a different beast living in Gettysburg, and people visit. Right. Obviously, they stay in hotels in Gettysburg, and so they think, I love it, I want to live in Gettysburg. And it is fun to live in Gettysburg. I've done it for 10 years. But sooner or later, it depends on what you want out of life. Like, I'm a guy who likes wide open spaces. I don't want my neighbors knowing what I'm doing. I don't want to know what they're doing. And I certainly don't want the damn code enforcement officer looking around my fence. And Gettysburg is a place where you cannot be your own person. And so I like, having my office in Gettysburg, visiting Gettysburg every day to do work, and then staying to do something else, if that's okay. That's enough for me. I'm moving to a place that's 8 miles away. It'll be fine. I'll exist, and I'll have that peace and quiet that I've always wanted. And but do that. Rent before you buy, just so you know. Get familiar with the area, because it's a gorgeous area.
It is. I've parked at different points in town. I've walked through town. It's just, every time I go, I find something new. Yep.
And I've lived here for total of 10 years. There was an 8-year break in between, but it was 5 and 5. That'll be 11 years soon. And I still find something new that I never knew of before, either in town, on the battlefield, or in the surrounding area. And it's to me, it's like a playland. Like everywhere I can, I could go and do like farm type stuff if I want to. And I'm not far from cities if I ever miss a city and I need to go to a city, which so far I haven't. But DC is not far away. Frederick, Maryland's not far away. Harrisburg, Philly's only 2 hours away. Yeah, and if I feel like wasting a day, I could drive out to Pittsburgh for 4 hours. Like there's a lot of things that are close. And then West Virginia, Virginia, Maryland, like they're just so many this is such a gorgeous part of the country.
When my last trip there with my son 2 years ago, we did, we took a day and went over to Cashtown Inn and Harper's Ferry and Antietam. We took another day and went down to DC, so it was all driving distance.
Yeah. That's what's so great about it here. The problem is the people from DC and Baltimore and Bethesda and Annapolis and Frederick and Philly are all recognizing how great it is, and they're starting to move out here. So it's kind of
urban flight.
Yes, they're ruining it. So that's why I'm moving like 8 miles west, because it's all right. Let's get started here. So are you here as the host of Scotty J Presents the Civil War? Is that how you want me to introduce you?
Sure.
Okay. And where can you find that? Anywhere there's a podcast?
Apple Podcast, Spotify. Yeah, you can find it there.
Okay.
And I'm sure it's on other platforms, because Apple's hooked up to like everybody.
Right. All right.
Way to go there, Steve Jobs.
Yeah. Most people listen to either Apple or Spotify, so I'll just say that.
Right. And I mean, I just got the idea to do it in the, well, I'll explain.
Okay. All right. Let me get it started here then.
All right.
All right. Here we go. Stand by.
Museum of History Studios. You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, patrons, and welcome to this episode of Addressing Gettysburg. And today we've got a fellow podcaster on. His name is Scott Klonowski. I had to make sure I pronounced it right before, and I asked him, and I wrote it phonetically here, but I can't read my own writing. He is the host of Scotty J Presents the Civil War. It's a podcast that you can find on Apple and Spotify, and he's pretty sure other platforms. So just Google it if you forget where you can find it. But otherwise, welcome, Scott. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the show.
You're very welcome. And you said it was a friend of yours, Scott. Who's your friend that?
Tim Scott from the History Dweebs.
Tim Scott from the History Dweebs is who introduced us, suggested you come on the show. So thank you to Tim for that. And History Dweebs. Now I have to check that out. So I'm going to do that.
Yeah, they do a lot of true crime. I was on. I did early shows. I did. My first one with them was John Wilkes Booth.
Okay.
I did Booth, I did Custer, the McKinley assassination, the Garfield assassination.
Okay, good. I like that. I like I'm a big JFK guy.
I don't think we were going to do JFK. We've always talked about going back and doing Martin Luther King.
That's an interesting one.
MLK and Bobby Kennedy, because I think they were right around the same time.
They were both in '68, I think, weren't they?
Yeah, I think. Yeah. My 20th century history is not that good.
Mine too. I lived through a good portion of it, so
right.
It's not as interesting to me.
I'm studying for my master's, so I cover from like early Republic to the end of the 19th century.
Yeah, that's interesting, that time. Well, and so today, what we're talking about is a topic I'm assuming you suggested.
Yes. I came across James Longstreet when I was working on my bachelor thesis. I never heard of him. Funny, I grew up in the land of Lincoln, so Lincoln and Grant are president.
Right.
So I started looking more into James Longstreet, who he was, and then I started seeing all these things about, the lost cause interpretation of him. So I, dug more. And as we all know, he was President Gettysburg. Early morning too, he arrived with his troops, I believe.
Yeah.
And, fought with sickles down in the wheat field and the peach orchard on afternoon of day 2. But one thing that stuck out to me was Early's claim of the dawn attack order.
Right. So a little background then. We're talking about this idea that Longstreet's attack on the left, which ultimately would result in battles around the Peach Orchard, the Wheat Field, Little Round Top, Devil's Den, etc. That whole movement was meant to be executed right at dawn, according to Early, and it was supposed to be carried out by Longstreet's Corps. But as you point out, I believe Longstreet himself is there like on the evening of the 1st, and then his corps starts to trickle in throughout the night. They're delayed by Johnson's division, I believe, from Ewell's corps. So Longstreet's corps has to kind of wait while they filter onto the road and get into town. So they're a little bit delayed, so they're not going to get here in time for the first day. But they're still not up in full or even in the 2/3 that will end up launching that attack. by dawn. So this claim from Early that it's supposed to happen at dawn is ridiculous. I don't know why people didn't Google it back then. But obviously there's no Google, so people have to believe it, right? Because why would this guy lie?
Right.
Now, where does he start this rumor or this truth?
At Washington and Lee University, which we all know was Washington University until, after the war, General Lee becomes superintendent there, or like chief
president or something. Yeah.
So after his death, they renamed the university in his honor, and they're giving, it's a year later. Let's celebrate Lee's birthday. I believe Early had just gotten back a few years before from exile. He had exiled himself after the war, Canada, Mexico, because he believed with the Union victory, they're going to prosecute him for burning Chambersburg.
Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of plays into what Lincoln wanted with, he was fine with the Confederate leadership just exiling themselves.
Right.
He's like, why prosecute them? I'd be happy if they just left.
Yeah. Don't cause any more trouble.
Right. So he comes up on the anniversary, and he says, he then determined to make an attack from our right on the enemy's left, and left us for the purpose of ordering up Longstreet's corps in time to begin the attack. At dawn the next day. That corps was not in readiness to make the attack until 4:00 in the afternoon the next day. By that time, Meade's whole army had arrived on the field and taken position. Had the attack been made at daylight, as contemplated, it must have resulted in a brilliant and decisive victory, as all of Meade's army had not arrived and a very small portion was not in position.
So wait, you just said there the phrase "as contemplated."
Yeah.
See how slippery Early was? As contemplated. That doesn't mean it was ordered.
No, and
as contemplated. But I think what he's saying. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, that night he was present for a meeting because Lee met with Ewell at his headquarters, and Ewell's there, Rhodes is there, and Early's there, and Lee wanted to know, okay, I want to attack the next day as early as possible. Are your men ready? And they're like, no, they're not ready. The terrain was steep and rocky. I believe they were positioned by Culp's Hill at the end of the first day.
Who, Early?
Yeah.
Early's guys were in town. I mean, they could see Culp's Hill. They were just north of Culp's Hill, but they were in town. But I mean, the whole Second Corps is operating in that part of town and outside of town, the eastern armpit of town, with the farms out there, the Culp Farm and everything.
Oh, out there by Walmart today.
No.
Oh.
Along the Hanover Road, there's a sewage treatment plant now. The Culp Farm the farmhouse and barn are still there, near the entrance to East Confederate Avenue. But it's basically along Middle Street is where we're talking, in the Hanover Road.
Okay. Oh, new places to check on my next visit.
Yeah. It's easy to miss. It's all neighborhoods now. But when you go, if you're going to Culp's Hill and you're going to go through town, because there's two ways to get into Culp's Hill. So if you're going to go through town, you want to turn down like Middle Street and head out, and then it's a right on Liberty Street.
Okay.
And it's just nondescript entrance. There's one sign there, and you could miss it if you don't know where to go. And that'll take you. And the Culp Farm is going to be on your left. But that's kind of the area where, well, it is the area where the Second Corps was positioned and where they would take up positioning. But yeah.
But at this point, Lee wanted to make a morning attack. No time frame is mentioned. And he just said as soon as possible in the morning. So Early basically excuses his troops from attack the next day because he plays up, oh, well, the terrain's not good enough for sustained attack.
Yeah.
So he leaves sometime, and as they report, the stars were still out. He leaves and actually meets up with Longstreet's division. And that's when we get the reports on day 2 that, the fog kind of obscures the Federal left. They don't know who's there. By that point, Meade's got his army in position. I think he calls the War Council the next night at the Leicester House, where they wanted to press the advantage on day 3.
And Mrs. Thompson's.
Yeah, I think it
Wait,
was.
I'm sorry. I missed something there. Meade or Lee you're talking about?
Meade.
Oh yeah, Meade's at the Leicester House.
Yeah, he calls up a war council the next night.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, they're still here in the morning. Let's attack. For those of you that have seen the Gettysburg movie, it's about, maybe 5 minutes.
Yeah. So we sit and wait and let them attack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I kind of think that, okay, if we know after the war, because Pendleton picks up this story the next year, Lee's artillery commander, William Pendleton, picks up the story and goes, well, yeah, Longstreet was supposed to attack, but he didn't. So then, especially with Early getting involved with the Southern Historical Society papers, later in the 1870s, early 1880s, he's got the ability to put this into print, and no one challenged him except for James Longstreet.
Right.
Because after the war, he becomes a Republican down in New Orleans. So you have a little bit of animosity there because he's a turncoat. He's a Republican. He's no longer a Democrat.
Right.
And you start, if you want to compare the two, Lee or Longstreet had a better military record than Early did. And you kind of see this in Confederate memoirs at the time. They're still fighting with each other over who did what, who didn't do what.
Yeah.
You almost need to start at the beginning, like when the first memoirs come out, and go, okay, who's attacking who? Who's going to write the next one to counteract this argument?
Yep. Yeah, and I had this conversation the other day with a couple of friends of mine, actually last night, and I said, the more I'm learning about the Confederates, the more I'm realizing that, and at least the ones who were public and were giving speeches and writing articles and out there, putting themselves out there, the loudest ones, they were pretty big scumbags in my estimation. And I say it this way because we would call somebody running around today obfuscating the truth, pointing the finger at everybody else but themselves, they'd be a scumbag.
Right.
They're no different than, any modern, I guess, politician. Never takes responsibility for anything. You're responsible for over 500,000 American lives being lost, and it's everybody else's fault but your own. And the thing that's most aggravating and frustrating to me about this is that that notion has become or had become the prevailing notion when studying the Civil War. And it's just amazing to me that only in the United States of America could the enemies of the United States eventually come out squeaky clean, and the United States is the bad guy. And this is not just the Civil War. This happens in every war that we've been involved in, except so far they haven't been very successful in doing it with World War II. They're close with Japan. But, as far as Europe goes, we're still the good guys there.
Yeah, Japan's kind of getting this almost clean image.
Yeah.
I can kind of forgive them because they gave me Godzilla.
I can't because I read The Rape of Nanking. And as far as I'm concerned, I have no sympathy. But the point I'm trying to make is that it seems to be that the United States, the American people, are so great that they will allow other American people to get away with saying that the United States Army or armed forces are the worst in the world and the worst, not honorable people. Everything. We're like, oh yeah, that's okay. And we look at the enemy and we go, oh, you're so wonderful, you're so great. And that's what we did with the Civil War, and that's what we've done with every war that I've been around for. And I would say, like I said, the world wars are maybe the only exception for now. But
for now,
yeah, but it just aggravates me to read about the Civil War and realize that all this stuff I grew up believing without question was taught to me by teachers, by historian talking heads on documentaries, wherever. And the adults in my family, they learned it that way, so they would tell me these things, not thinking twice about it. No, and now here I'm like, well, this goddamn asshole early started it all.
Well, and we don't really think about it because our educators and our parents, we look up to them to give us this knowledge.
Yeah.
I can refer to it like this. Think of history as a painting.
Yep.
Okay, when you're in grade school, you just get the broad strokes. Get to high school, you get just a little bit of detail added to those broad strokes. You go to college and now you get all the details. All the details are filled in and you're left wondering, I like the broad strokes better.
Yeah. I like your painting analogy. Here's my painting analogy, because I have one too. History is like a painting that's been sitting in your attic for 60 years, let's say. And it's full of grime and dust and cigarette smoke and God knows what else has gotten on this over the last 60 or so years. You could see it. You could tell there's different colors, but there's this cast over it. Mm-hmm. And you have to go and you have to remove the cast and you have to restore it. And then when you finally do and you remove all those layers of shit and filth, you get to the nice, brilliant colors, and there's the real picture. I think that's what's happening now with Civil War studies, is that historians and people who are just interested in it are going, now, wait a minute. Mm-hmm. There's veneer over all this stuff.
Right. And you start looking back, because that's what I did with Longstreet. I started backtracking. Where did this begin? Okay, early. He's probably one of the progenitors of this. So you start looking, well, he goes into the Southern Historical Society papers.
Yeah.
Then you get Confederate Veteran Magazine. Then you get the United Daughters and the Sons of Confederate Veterans. Then you get, and I really want to make a piñata out of this woman so I can beat it. Mildred Lewis Rutherford in the 1920s, the historian general of the United Daughters of the Confederacy.
Okay.
If you ever see a picture of she's an older woman and she's always wearing antebellum hoop skirts.
Oh, yeah.
And she made it her job to make sure that Southern school children learn the proper version of the Civil War.
Right.
And I had the checklist in my library. Basically, any book that, like, okay, if you're going to promote Lincoln over Jefferson Davis, not being taught to Southern children. If Confederates are called traitors, not being taught to Southern children.
Yeah.
So she systematically created a checklist. That's why you see guys today going, the heritage, not hate crowd.
Yep.
It's not slavery, it was tariffs. Well, no, it was slavery.
Yeah. Always blaming tariffs.
Oh, I actually had to do. I had somebody when I first started my college education hit that tariff myth, and I'm like, where did this come from?
Yeah, I know. They love to keep dragging that out.
I see people today that I debate. Well, I don't really debate them. I just go, "You're a moron. Here's the truth." They cling to tariffs like a life preserver.
Yeah.
The moral tariff in particular.
Since we brought up tariffs, why don't you, for people who are new to this, that are listening, and what is the tariff argument that they bring up, and why is it wrong?
They say that tariffs are paid at the port on imports coming into the country.
Right.
So there was a tariff. They like to claim the moral tariff, but in actuality, the tariffs were relatively low in 1860. New York, the port of New York, actually paid more than like Charleston and New Orleans put together. I think they were paying close to like 1 million, and the other two were like in the low 100,000s.
Yeah.
But it was a tax on luxury goods, stuff that Southerners needed. Like furniture, silk, clothes, whatever. So they like to say that because the tariffs were so high, that it was a reason why the South left. And I go, okay, well, here's the link to all the declarations of secession that was passed between 1860 and 1861. Can you find any spot in there that says we left because the taxes were too high?
Exactly.
Because I can point to like 6 of them that say right in the opening line, we identify with slavery and we're leaving because you're taking our, and this is an argument, whatever political party insert is coming after our insert idea.
Yeah.
Or item or whatever. It's, and they cling to it like a life preserver.
Yeah. And they know, or maybe they don't know, they believe it wholeheartedly. That's the thing about someone who can look you in the eye and with conviction in their voice spew the biggest line of bullshit in the world. Mm-hmm. If they believe it and don't know it's bullshit, to them it's the truth. And it's even if you don't know why they're wrong, but you know they're wrong and you can't explain it, you still know that it's almost easier to just like accept it because you don't know how to argue with them because you don't know why they're wrong, but usually it's the crazed look in the eye, because it's never just looking you in the eye. It's looking you in the eye and their eyes are as big as hen's eggs.
Yeah, like, a blank stare.
Yeah, and it's just, well, my granddaddy didn't fight for no slaves. He couldn't own a slave. Like, yeah, but okay, but that's still fighting for slavery. And yeah, they don't even know of reading secession papers or anything like that.
No,
because when they, yeah, go ahead.
I had heard this. I think I heard it on the Professor Buzzkill podcast from Professor Nash of Penn State. They're more important what was said after the war than what was said before the war.
Yeah.
And I tell Lost Cause believers this all the time. Look at what was said in 1861.
Right.
Look at what was said in 1859. Mm-hmm. Look at the speeches of the concession or the secession commissioners. They're clear on what their main problem was, or what they believed their main problem was.
Yep.
And they're like, well, no, it's okay.
Yeah.
Fine.
Yeah, it's convenient that, after the war is over, you realize, man, we screwed up. And then you say, no, it was never about that. That's not why we did it. And it's like, well, first of all, what does it matter why you did it? I mean, I think, you did it. And 600, now they're saying 750,000 American lives were just wasted, an entire generation traumatized by your inability to grow with the times, I guess, or I don't know what it is, but
well, if you also look at it, I mean, in some Southern communities, the entire male population was wiped out.
Yeah.
So, you lose a generation because of war, because, infection from an amputation or a wound. So that's why when you get to like 1890s, early 1900s, you've got these young women marrying a Confederate veteran because of that pension check coming in.
Yeah.
And yeah, it might have been $60, but back then $60 was a lot.
It's a lot. It goes a long way.
So you're going, okay, do I want to stay here on the farm and be miserable, or hopefully this old man who's getting $60 a month has a cute grandson I can date later.
Right. I'll get his inheritance and then I'll marry the grandson.
Right.
Yeah, which is smart.
And, I mean, I saw my great grandfather's pension papers, and he was getting $25 a month, and this was the 1920s.
Okay, not bad. Even then, that wasn't bad.
No. And like I said, before we clicked on the mics, he fought at Philippi.
Yeah.
Did his 3 months and said, "I'm done."
Yep. Yeah, smartest man ever. Frankly.
Okay, you're right.
So, all right.
An Irish immigrant went farming.
Yeah. Let's get back to the subject at hand, though. So Early starts this idea. What is it? A year and a half, 2 years after.
A year after Lee dies.
So 1871.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's given a speech at Washington Lee College, and he basically now, is he making it a big point, or is it just like one of those sly things you slip in?
He was given a speech, and I've looked at the speech. Basically, the speech was titled "The Campaigns of Robert E. Lee," so he covered the whole military history of the war.
Okay.
And it was just one, gets to Gettysburg, and he goes, just goes, okay, well, we could have, basically boils down to, we could have won on day 2 if Longstreet attacked early.
Okay.
So then, as this story grows, Longstreet sees it in the papers, and he's like, wait, what? No, this didn't happen. So he starts writing to Lee's staff members who are alive.
Right.
And he's like, look back through your records. And all these men confirm this order never existed.
Which should have ended it right there.
But because he's a Republican, he's a traitor to the South, they keep on the attack. And then, as I said, William Pendleton picks up the story.
Mm-hmm.
And after he dies, his Longstreet's wife, Helen, who kind of takes this Libby Custer role in trying to correct her husband's image, she comes out, and I have her books too, Longstreet and Lee at Gettysburg, which contains the correspondence that these two fought in the papers.
Mm-hmm. And
she says, well, Pendleton's memory was faulty. Who can count on him to remember anything? Which, I mean, if you're an artillery captain, yeah, you're around loud explosions all day. Your
brain's getting jostled. Yeah.
And eventually the story sticks. It becomes pretty much one of the tenets in the Lost Cause narrative. We could have had our independence if Longstreet attacked at dawn. And I didn't know about this until I picked up Edward Bonkemper's book on the Lost Cause.
Mm-hmm.
See, I didn't know that there was this whole other study to the Civil War. So, and I read the book and I went, wait, what? Huh? So then I started looking into it. And on visits to Gettysburg, I would visit our center. I would go to the park guys and say, where did this happen? And everyone knows the little fold-up maps we get at the visitor center. I still have it somewhere. This guy drew me lines of the path Longstreet was to take on day 2 to launch his attack.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think one of them's a little creek down by the name of the covered bridge is escaping me.
Down the Sachs covered bridge.
Yeah, right down was one of the routes, but a guide got them lost. Is what I've always read.
Well, now, so not that they got lost, it's that they realized that had they continued on the route they were on, there was a hill that they would have gone up that would be easily seen by the signal station on Little Round Top. So they had to double back a bit and find another route that had more concealment. And they don't know how much of a delay that actually was. But here's the thing, though. And you probably know this, so jump in and join me here. I don't need to lecture you.
No, not a problem.
But so Longstreet, first of all, Lee doesn't even make the plan until after dawn on July 2nd.
Yes.
He has to send Johnston out. He has to send a recon, and he has more than one party out, by the way. And
yeah. He sent one, and I think someone else had sent another one.
Yeah.
And they both come up with the idea, or come back and say, listen, it's foggy down on that end. It's open, it's open. They assumed that it was open. They couldn't tell because of the fog. It wasn't until the fog lifted that, Sickles was down there, and, Meade had stretched out the left to the little round top to protect the flank.
Right. But the problem, not the problem, but the thing is, like you just gave a very simplified answer or version of that, but that took hours for all that to develop. And, a lot of people, see, I think people like Early who will come up with some nonsense and spread it to an audience of novices, people who don't have any idea of what it's like to actually be, in this case, in the Army, right?
Right.
And maybe there were some people in the audience, but whatever. The most people hearing it, it wasn't intended for the people who know better. It's intended for the people who don't. And the people who don't, who weren't even here, what do they know? Why wouldn't they believe this veteran of the battle, of the war, a general? But they don't know, like, how, first of all, Longstreet doesn't get the order till around 11 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
He then asks for permission to wait for Law's brigade, which is, I don't know, not very far away. They're almost here. Can I wait for Law's brigade to come up? I'm already without Pickett. Let me at least get this brigade. I think it's an eighth of his force at that point. So Lee says, yeah, that's fine. So that puts it till 11:45 before they can step off. And then they step off, and they've got a good number of miles to go. So it's going to take a while. Now you've got this thing where you turn around and, and by the way, and that doesn't mean they actually leave at 11:45. That means they can leave at 11:45 because Law is up. So who knows? He probably left sometime in the 12 o'clock hour. So now it's going to take you a few hours to get down there, even, with the backtracking and finding a new way. Then you come out of the woods and you see that there's a whole Union Corps out on the Emmitsburg Road that wasn't supposed to be there, and then you have to go back and realign your lines. You've got to change your lines, which is going to take more time. And so finally, you get going at 4 in the afternoon-ish, and yeah, that's what's going to happen. You're not going to be able to just like teleport 4 or 5 miles away and say, okay, here I am, let's attack, boys. Like, it's going to take some time. You got to plan. You got to make sure that everybody knows what's supposed to happen. So, yeah. So it's very unfair. I've always thought this. Once I found out how it all played out, I really, really lost respect for Early, and anybody who was blaming Longstreet for this.
Right, and I think Early was still on the north end of the field that day, so he had no idea what was going on the south end.
Yeah, this is not a firsthand recollection on Early's part. This is him being an ass.
This is him jerk. This is him going, look, I'm still a Confederate. I didn't betray my country.
I ain't a Republican.
Yeah, right. I'm not a Republican. He's our enemy. He's the reason we didn't win.
Yep.
But we also forget that Vicksburg was happening at the same time.
Right.
So, both, and I hate using this word for Davis, but both presidents were kind of like watching both situations at the same time.
Yeah, there's a lot going on that they're paying attention to.
Huge, I don't know how. I mean, you can see the pictures in Lincoln from like 1861. How much it aged him.
Yeah, horrendously.
I haven't seen too many pictures of Davis from before the war to what he looked like after the war.
Well, he aged too, but it looked like Lincoln aged worse. But I also think that Lincoln had, what's that disease?
Yeah, I've heard about it. Something wrong with him.
Yeah, I forget what it's called.
That stretched the face or something.
Something to do with him being tall too, like
Right.
So, yeah,
I don't think it was gigantism.
No. It has another name, and it's yet another word that is on the tip of my tongue that is not coming to me.
If that was the case, we could have had Andre the Giant in the office.
Yeah. Okay, so continue on then with your.
So, and I mean, Longstreet's friends were just like, don't engage in this, just let it go. But the Southern Code of Honor, he's searching me. I have to respond.
Right.
These two duel it out in the papers, and even Longstreet's, trying to tell him, Lee's men don't have a copy of this. Where are you making this information up? You weren't at our meeting.
Right. But what amazes me, though, is that wasn't enough to get others reading this to say, what are you doing, Jube?
Well, and what I think it boiled down to was, we're 6-7 years after the war's end. We're in the middle of Reconstruction, right, or in the beginnings of it, at least, with Grant in office. These men were still resentful that they lost.
Sure.
So we need to blame somebody. We can't blame Lee because he's this great general for the South.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's blame it all on Longstreet. He was the only one left at that time out of Lee's top lieutenants who were still around. They had just lost Jackson at Chancellorsville back in May of 1963. Longstreet was left. He never replaced Jackson. He just kind of shuffled everybody around and went, okay, we'll send you some here. We'll send you guys here, reshuffling of the Corps. Jackson was built to be this great hero of the South, and I'm sure you've heard it. Well, what if Jackson was at Gettysburg?
Oh, God, of course.
I reply, well, he would have been one-armed, waving a hand saying, no, I ain't doing this.
You don't think he would have saved the day with his cape?
He still would have been laid up on the injured list after the amputation.
That's a good point. How long does it take to get over an amputation and be back in the field?
Longstreet was injured almost in the exact same spot in the Wilderness in 1964, shot through the shoulder and the throat and survived.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like May of 1964. He made it back for the siege of Petersburg later that year.
So a while is the answer.
Yeah.
I mean, Ewell, with his leg, he lost that, in August of 1962?
Yeah.
And then gets back, here in the spring of 1963. So it takes a while to heal. So Jackson probably wouldn't have been here.
No, he still would have been, he would have just lost his arm 2 months before.
See, it's interesting, though, that you went that direction because most people, their funny answer is, well, he would have smelled. And but the thing that's the reason I find that an interesting answer that you gave is because you're assuming, okay, if he had lived, he still would have been wounded.
Yeah.
So, and I think that the people that fantasize about Jackson having come back are fantasizing that he never was even wounded, that he just survived unscathed and comes in, angelic Jackson and swoops down and blast the Yankees with the fire of heaven or some nonsense.
Right. This man was wounded 2 months prior. He would not have been he could have been in an advisory position from his bedside.
Sure.
But as a command position, no, he would not have been on the field.
The whole Jackson thing is mostly annoying to me.
It is.
Because he wasn't here, and it doesn't matter. And I know the people that really seriously want to ponder that are kind of fantasizing about the South winning the battle because they think that the South winning the battle means they would have won the war. I don't think so because I don't even think that the North winning this battle guaranteed that they won, and that's with hindsight. And I think
you're taking a look at it. You still have Vicksburg going on at the same time.
Yeah.
So, they lose Vicksburg right as Lee's retreating out of Gettysburg.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now you're cut off from the Western Confederacy because the Federal Army now controls the Mississippi. You're cut off from like Arkansas, Texas, parts of Louisiana. Okay, you've lost supply lines, but then you've got Grant starting his move across the South. Chattanooga's coming up, Chickamauga later in the year.
Mm-hmm.
You're losing the West as you're focused more on the East, which plays into another part of the lost cause. We put all this emphasis on the East because between Second Bull Run and Gettysburg was Lee's greatest moments.
Yeah.
He's winning Second Bull Run. He's got the draw at Antietam. Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville. He's got these great victories. What did they cost him, though?
Yeah. And meanwhile, in the West,
Grant is just mowing over everybody.
So that's another great point that I have yet to hear, but also I'm not that I'm not knee deep in the lost cause yet. But I've talked about it with historians before, and I haven't heard too many people make that point, that they focus on the lost cause focuses more on the East because that's where they were winning for a good time.
And most of it's because a lot of the guys in the Southern Historical Society were Virginians.
Mm-hmm.
And it also plays to the newspaper aspect. You're going to get more coverage in the East because you've got Virginians in charge of the Army of Northern Virginia. In the West, it's not as populated. You got your big centers like, Nashville, Chattanooga, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. But there's really no local heroes in charge of those armies.
Right.
Bragg, but Bragg was his own worst enemy.
Yeah, it's a different culture out there. It's a different landscape. It's just everything about it out there is different. Mm-hmm. It doesn't. It's still the frontier in a lot of ways. Yeah. So it's not as structured as it is out east with your cities and your.
You got your pockets, like New Orleans or Nashville.
Yeah,
but it's not Richmond. Right. It's not Charleston, Savannah. I think a part of it, a lot of it is like most of these families in the East had been there since colonial times. So there's tradition, there's structure.
It's older. There's roots. There's deeper roots in the East. Yeah.
Most of the West was settled early 1820s, maybe by 1830. So they were younger states.
Right.
My state, Illinois, 1818, we came into the Union.
Mm-hmm.
Mississippi wasn't too far after that. The Missouri Compromise of 1820. So these are younger states. The traditions aren't there.
Right.
As say, Charleston or Richmond. And it really plays out more once you get closer towards the end of the war with Sherman's March, where Governor Joe Brown's telegraphing Richmond, hey, I need troops. And Davis is like, yeah, but Richmond needs more protecting than Georgia does. So yeah.
So yeah. Yeah. So the idea, this idea though of, really, like I think you even said in the writing that you sent me, for basically 160 years, we've believed that Longstreet had the slows. He had a case of the slows and dragged his heels, and he was harumphing and pouting because he didn't want to do it. He didn't like the idea, and that there's truth to that. I'm sure that he didn't like the idea, But I don't know why all of a sudden Longstreet would act like a child. I mean, it's not like he was new to the job. It's not like he was some impetuous 20-year-old who's got his stars, like he's not a Custer type.
No, he had been in the Army his whole life.
Yeah.
He, like Lee, went through West Point, saw action in Mexico, which is kind of funny because he was in a charge with Pickett in Mexico. Pickett was carrying the colors. He got hit. Longstreet picked up the colors and carried them. And here he is, 20, 30 years later, serving under Longstreet again.
Yeah.
And a lot of the, they say about his attitude, that gets added on later, the embellishments of Jubal Early and others. Because since day 2, he was arguing a flank attack.
Yeah.
And Lee was the mindset that if the attack worked good one day, I'm going to use it again the next day, which is where we get Pickett's from. He made the charge on day 2. Okay, some success on the, not quite as good as he wanted up on Little Round Top because of Chamberlain and the other units up there, but they did break through towards the evening down by Devil's Den, I believe. But they were repulsed, and he wanted to try it again on day 3, and that's when we get that famous scene in the movie where, I know it's an embellishment, but even Longstreet said in his memoirs, I advised against attacking the center. It was a suicide mission.
Yeah.
But Lee used it the day before. It worked. I'm going to use it again.
I think it's funny. Like the lost cause is an interesting thing to study. I'm not a well-versed student in it yet, but I've started to kind of delve into it because I feel like in order to really understand not the Civil War, but what we believe about the Civil War, you have to understand what the lost cause is, and you have to learn how to identify it. You know, it's like that painting when you take the stuff off and you put the Q-tip under a microscope. You need to know how to identify the tobacco smoke or just regular old dirt. And so, and when I in all my condemnation of the lost causers here, I'm not saying that the United States soldiers were always honest. I'm not saying that they were all angels, that they didn't do some horrendous things to the Southern people and the soldiers to each other. Regardless of which army they were in, they all, it's a war. It's a horrible thing, and it's a man at his most animalistic. But this idea that the only bad guy in the Civil War was the winner, and again, I got to repeat this: like it is almost every war we've been in since that. Within 10 years of the war ending, that seems to be. Well, not at least within 10 years, sometimes longer, but it seems to be that eventually it's the enemies who were the virtuous ones and not the United States, which really pisses me off.
It does. It's really weird because, like I said, I didn't know about this lost cause studies. I come across the book, I read it, and for the longest time, I went on a divergent path from studying the war itself to going, well, what's this all about?
Yeah.
And I started tracking down books. I've got Edward Pollard's book on my shelf.
Okay.
I have to give credit to the Heritage Center there in Gettysburg because I picked up some lost cause books from them.
Which ones?
A few of Lachlan Seabrook's books.
Okay.
And he's a great person for studying the lost cause because the man quotes himself in the citations.
Okay.
And, he's got, I think he has a serious man crush on Nathan Bedford Forrest because he's written like 9 books on Forrest.
Okay, gotcha.
And I bought a few there. And, I mean, I'll give a shout out to the Heritage Center because I love shopping there. You guys have supplied me with some great books over the years. It's one of two bookstores I hit when I visit Gettysburg.
What's the other?
The Visitor Center.
Have you tried For the Historian? They are a proud sponsor of Addressing Gettysburg, and if you mention Addressing Gettysburg, you get 20% off your order.
No, but I think there's one on York, on the York Avenue that I've been to.
That's For the Historian.
Okay, yeah, I shopped in there, or I didn't buy anything, but I stopped in there.
Well, next time you go in, buy something and mention the show, and you'll get a discount.
I went in with my ex-girlfriend, and we were just like walking around the store looking at everything. That's when we left the kids at the hotel and prayed that they didn't kill each other. Come back, and it's the President's Inn down there on York.
Yeah.
My son was sitting in the sleeping area at the table. Her daughter was locked in the bathroom.
So they didn't get along.
No, they didn't.
Of course.
But it's amazing because once you start getting into the lost cause, you start, you pick up a book and you're like, well, what's this? And then you start like cross-referencing everything that they say, like if it's an actual historian, and Gary Gallagher's written a couple great books on it. But then you start looking to like what the proponents have written. And then you start going, okay, well, make this note. What did this do?
The proponents of the lost cause?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you get guys like the Kennedy brothers, Lachlan Seabrook. You almost seem like you have a, one of those conspiracy theorist cork boards on your wall, connecting everything with different colored yarn. Okay, this person said this, and then this person added it, and this person picked it up, but it's an interesting subculture of Civil War studies to look into, because it held sway for 100 years. It started breaking up right around the centennial. Is when you first start getting those new historians coming in and kind of like breaking up, exposing the myths, breaking them up, and then you get the later guys like the late Peter Carmichael, Caroline Janney, Gary Gallagher, continuing to work.
Yep. Yeah.
Which I hope to continue myself one day.
Well, and the you mentioned Caroline Janney, and she's have you read her book Ends of War?
Yes.
There's first of all, there has to be, and there is now, a willingness among historians to kind of take the Civil War basket, turn it upside down, and shake it around a bit, and then turn it back up, and then kind of pull through, and find other pieces of information that we didn't have before, and or just not even find it, but maybe it's already always been there, but nobody ever put it in anything because it didn't fit a narrative. And I feel like now the narrative is undo the myths of the Civil War. Get down to the real story. Because, the thing about the Civil War that always kind of irked me was like, how did all of these magnificent, wonderful, glorious, heroic, gallant people all exist at the same time in history, in the same place? It's amazing. And they were mostly on the same side.
I did my show. I did an episode on John Brown, and he's one of these people that no matter what I read on him, I can't understand him.
You can't understand him in which way?
Reasoning.
Well, he was a psychopath. There is no reasoning with a psychopath.
Yeah, I should realize that. I grew up with a schizophrenic parent, so I should recognize.
I mean, I don't think a lot of people. I know people want to make a hero out of him, and I think his cause was just. I think his method was he was insane. Everybody talks about Harper's Ferry, but look at what he did before. Look at the hacking people with broadswords.
Yeah,
the guy was he was a psychopath.
I kind of look at John Brown and I go, this man, for better or worse, was a force of change that hit at the right moment in our country.
I think I agree with you, but I think that what it was he was a candidate for the insane asylum who never got put in one, and because he was able to be free, he was that pressure valve release, you know, or pressure release valve that kind of made everybody kind of go, okay, there's something here.
Right.
Now, even though he was a nut and what he was thinking he was going to do was never going to happen.
Not by a long shot.
Yeah, and he got people killed in the process. But still, it had an effect for sure.
It was that flashpoint that the war was going to come.
Yes, and
we didn't know when.
No, but there was something irreconcilable.
And I try with my show to kind of tell these stories that kind of get overlooked.
Right.
I came up with, I've been trying to work on the idea for 6 years. Wanted to do a Civil War podcast, never knew how to go about it. Do I follow the same true path, chronologically? So last year I was in Virginia and I was standing in the Red Room at the White House of the Confederacy.
Okay.
And I'm standing in there and I'm hearing the docent going, well, we know how this room looked because everyone described it. And it kind of dawned on me.
Uh-huh.
These walls have stories that we don't know about.
Right. That's
my direction I'm going in.
Okay.
So, I talk about, I just did this week, the mythology, Lee turning down the order for leading the federal troops.
Right.
And it wasn't so much that, the great mythologizing moment, well, he could never raise his sword against his native. No, it's not so much the state. It was the people. He couldn't raise his sword against friends and family. So I kind of demystify that aspect of Lee. I looked into how Lincoln got elected at the Republican convention. His men got there ahead of swordsmen and started politicking.
Yeah.
And I've had positive reactions. I've had reviews going, hey, I didn't know this stuff. Thanks for telling me. And I'm enjoying it. I mean, I love studying the Civil War. I've got about 3-4 bookcases filled.
Yeah. Yeah.
You should see my Amazon wish list on books. It's like,
it's insane.
If I win the lottery, I'm buying my wish list.
You know what you should do? And this helped me. Pete Carmichael did it for me, so I don't have that obviously connection anymore, but get if you can get on a publisher's book reviewer list, they'll send them to you for free. And then, you just got to make sure that you get the authors on and they'll keep sending them. But I mean, that's a great way. I mean, I could put you in touch with people too, if you want.
Right.
Only caveat is you have to say, I have this guest courtesy of Matt from Addressing Gettysburg.
Not a problem. I mean, I kind of carry this on a little bit because I had talked to Dr. Carmichael on like Facebook Messenger.
Yeah.
And I told him back in December that I was going to do this podcast because I remember him on Civil War Talk Radio talking about the future of Civil War studies. And I said, well, have you thought about, would you include podcasting in that? He goes, absolutely. Because we can reach a larger audience than, a museum or, we can reach a worldwide audience.
Until the museums and visitor centers and whatever realize the value of co-opting us and using it, because they never get their public relations right. No. They don't know how to do it. And I just had a big long conversation about this with somebody, and it's such a old school way of doing things. But go ahead, you were saying, you mentioned it that you were going to be on the show.
And Dr. Carmichael, he gave me this, he said this in the end of his conversation with me. He goes, good luck. we need more voices out there. And I kind of, I kind of take that to heart, because it's kind of like getting the blessing from the man himself.
Yeah, yeah. No, I know what you mean. And that's the thing, is he was that way with everybody.
I've heard that.
And not that shouldn't make anybody feel less special, because he was that way with everybody. And first of all, he's probably, you could make the argument that he was more obligated to be that way to his students, but he didn't leave it at that.
No.
Anyone that he could reach, he would reach, and anyone he could help, he would help. And I'm sure not anyone. He had to have, seen something in people, but yeah, he was a great guy. He really was a great guy.
I sent him his copy of War for the Common Soldier, the autograph.
Uh-huh.
And it was waiting for me when I came back from Virginia. And nice. I opened it up and it said, "To Scott, a serious student of the Civil War."
Nice.
And I went, I'm going to put that on a plaque and just kind of hang it up.
Yeah, my copy of it says, "To Matt, leave me alone."
I would reach out to him and say, "Okay, I'm studying this person. What books are good?"
Yeah.
And he'd give me a list.
Yeah, I know. And that's the thing. Like, apparently he was often behind on his emails because he had so many of them, because he would do that for people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've always found historians to be a very gracious group.
For the most part, yeah.
I mean, I've reached out to Elizabeth Varon when I was writing about Longstreet. And I said, I heard you on C-SPAN 3 talking about this letter that Longstreet wrote to the Picayune, the New Orleans Picayune paper. Where did you find it? She goes, "Oh, I found it here." And she told me where to find it. She goes, "Good luck on your paper."
Yeah. I think you're correct. What did you say? They were gracious?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you're correct in this new, I shouldn't say new, they're not as new as they used to be, but this middle-aged generation of historians, the 55 and under crowd, they are more, I agree, they are more gracious. I noticed that in some ways the generation slightly older than them has a bit of more of an attitude, but I just think that's the way a historian was expected to be back in their time, and it was they're just a little snootier. They're not bad. They're just a little, there's a snootiness, and that's okay.
It's fine.
But
I came across that with an advisor.
Yeah, but the
younger generation, we're more,
the P. Carmichael generation is more
right.
Yeah,
we're more like, "Oh, you need help with this? Here's the book you need to look at.
Yeah,
here's the direction you should look in."
I guess it's because we don't look at it they don't look at it as competition like it might have been before. Because there's so many ways for you to cut your own path now. Even if you're a tenured professor, you can have your own podcast that'll possibly make you a little extra money if you wanted to. Obviously there's the books and everything. And I just think people realize now that you can do more together. And also, if you want to reach the general public, I don't really know that they're impressed with what someone knows. You know what I'm saying? Like, in other words, but they are impressed with how you reach them and tell them what you know. Like, in other words, it's not the content, it's the
delivery.
The delivery. And that's what these guys do better.
Problem.
Yeah.
Because when I take my kids to a museum, I get to be a little, I get to play, tour guide.
Right.
Museum guide. So, like here in Springfield, Abraham Lincoln. In one corner, they have the famous quote from the Horace Greeley letter. If I could free all the slaves, I would. And I told my kids, I'm like, this is often the misquoted letter.
Yeah.
You take this little part here and go, well, here's Lincoln's stand. Well, I'm like, but no, there's more to the letter. And I think my son or daughter went, well, what was the rest of the letter? And I said, well, he tells Greeley that, this part's, everyone knows, but he's bound by the Constitution at this particular moment on what he can and cannot do about slavery. But what Greeley doesn't know, he's got the Emancipation sitting in his desk drawer. He's waiting for a victory. That's going to come in September when Antietam rolls around. And my son, he loves, my daughter will, just absorb it and be like, oh, wow, my son, he marinates on it for a bit. And then he'll come back later with a question. And that's my delivery. That's my approach to, I had a professor on my advisor, my first advisor, and he's like, well, you need to think philosophically about history. And I'm like, the public doesn't think that about history.
I just want to hear a good story.
That's exactly what it is. That's what I try to do. Every week when I sit down and I try to read my chicken scratch, I'm trying to tell a good story that you may not have heard.
Right. Or tell a story you may have heard, but in an interesting way.
Right.
Like, who was really good at that? Do you remember Paul Harvey?
Oh, God. We used to listen to him. One place I worked, we had him on every day, and he was great.
He was fantastic. He would take a story that you probably have heard, or at least in part, but he would do it in such a way where you had no idea who he was talking about until the very end.
Right.
And and it was just so well done, and he did them every day, I think, right? He was on every day.
Every day.
It's a lot of work.
But before I forget, on Longstreet, there is a group working to correct his image.
Yeah.
Down in Gainesville, Georgia, where he moved after the war, he opened up a place called the Piedmont Hotel.
Yep.
It was a big 3-story hotel. Part of it still exists. I visited it. The Longstreet Society down in Gainesville is housed in what's left of the Piedmont. They're working to change Longstreet's image in the culture. And my undergrad thesis is sitting in their library, so I'm kind of happy about that.
Mm-hmm.
But they this little shop, it's one section of the hotel. It survived. A housing complex was built over it, and that's how they found it.
Really?
Yeah, tearing down this apartment complex, and they find what's left of the Piedmont Hotel.
You're kidding.
No.
They built over it.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Now, his actual house is no longer standing. He lost it in a fire in 1887. And they managed to save some furniture that's on display there in the society, and his handwritten manuscript of his memoirs.
Oh, wow.
And the day I went down there to visit him and like do some research, the guy's son was there, and he's like, well, it's nice to see a Yankee taking an interest in the general. I said, you know what? I'll take it as a compliment, because you got a Waffle House across the street from my hotel. We're good.
Yeah. But see, that I don't think they understand that it's our war too. And because of the lost cause, I think a lot of us kind of put it like this. A few years ago when they were tearing down monuments, right? We were sitting out ready to record a show out at the Virginia Memorial. And
nice memorial.
Yeah, beautiful.
Nice.
And while we were waiting, we got this guy came up to us, and it was like the day after there were like 400 guys with rifles here to protect the monuments. Do you remember that story?
I might have heard something about it.
Yeah,
it was like there was a threat of armed problems on the battlefield.
There was a hoax that Antifa was going to come here and burn the American flag in the cemetery and do face painting for the children. And it was so obviously a hoax, but people believed it. And 400 guys from what I call the Beer Belly Battalion came down here. Came down here. The Gravy Seals, is that what you said?
The Gravy Seals and Meal Team 6.
Yeah, that's basically what it was. There were some in shape guys, but not enough to make a difference.
No, not enough.
So anyway, so this is the day after all that. Everybody's gone. We're out there recording. This guy pulls up, gets out of his car, and he does the faux policeman macho walk over, and he's got a gun on his hip. We're an open carry state. None of us cared. And he said,
"Did the belt adjusting as he got out of the truck?"
Yeah.
The great maneuver.
Yeah, and so he comes out and he's doing this walk. He's looking around over his shoulder and everything. He goes, "Excuse me, guys, don't mean to interrupt you, but you seen any funny business going on here? Around the monument?" And my producer at the time, Eric, was this no bullshit kind of guy, and he was a veteran, and he couldn't stand these people. And he goes, "Not until you came here." And then the guy turned around and left. But where was I going? Now I forgot where I was going with that long story. What were we talking about right before that?
Well, the monuments on the battlefields are protected.
Oh. No. So where I was going with that, about it being, our war too. Up until then, because then we got to talking with the guests as kind of our warm-up. This wasn't even the subject, but it got us warmed up. And we got to talking about how, should the monuments come down? And Eric made the point, and this is the first time I had heard somebody say this. I'm sure he's not the first to say it, but the first time I've heard it. He made the point they never should have gone up in the first place because they're to traitors. And
Lee was one who said that.
And Lee, exactly. And but then he conceded. He goes, but now they're here and they're historic artifacts. So now use them to tell the story in full. Tell the story of the monument. When was it put up? What was the speech given? What does everything mean? What is this glorious cause that a lot of them refer to? And tell the whole story. And I then that is the first time my view of the Confederacy went under scrutiny in my mind, where I started to scrutinize the way I felt about them. And I had up until that point taken it as, well, we're all Americans. It was just a family squabble. I fell for that.
That's how I kind of explain it to like little kids about the Civil War.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, do you have brothers and sisters? Yeah. Well, do you fight? Yeah. Okay. Mom and dad act like the government. They're supposed to break up your fights. But this was a fight that was going to happen eventually, like a younger sibling pissing off his older sibling to the point where he's just like, all right, I gotta, you're going to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
And it happens. But, in a sense,
or one sibling goes with mom and one goes with dad. Dad and mom go separate ways. And then you take mom's side. Yeah.
Yeah. Divorced kids know that scenario.
But the thing is, yeah, they do. But the thing is, though, okay, I don't know if the family analogy really works anymore, though, because here's the thing that it misses. You have a family squabble, siblings argue, cousins, whatever it is, right? They argue and people take sides. Now, a relative, let's say, my dad's family, meaning me and my sister and my mother, and my uncle's family, my dad and my uncle get into some kind of squabble, and then they don't talk anymore. And of course, the kids and the spouses all take the sides. Grandma and grandpa are looking on, watching this thing, right? They go, oh, well, we're all calories. We're all, blah, 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 right? But the minute somebody from one side starts to kill somebody from the other side,
and everyone jumps in.
Well, no, I'm saying that, like, to hell with brothers and sisters and we're all family. You're killing each other.
Right.
You're both wrong.
The more time that I've spent going backwards from the Civil War to look how all of this started.
Right.
Going back to 1776 when sectional crises were first manifesting. I look at it and I think, the founders tried. They couldn't do anything. They hoped another generation would take care of it.
Right.
You get to 1820 when Calhoun comes onto the scene, starts taking the doctrine of Jefferson and Madison of states' rights through the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions and start going, well, no, this is right. We have these rights.
Mm-hmm.
And then just watching it morph over 40 years from slavery is bad to slavery is a positive good to you're not touching my slaves.
Right.
I had an advisor say people started the Civil War and go forward to see the end with civil rights. I went to the Civil War and went backwards to the beginning.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to know.
Well, I think it had to resolve an unresolved issue at the founding. That was the inevitable resolution. But then it created a whole new, a new birth of freedom, if you will. Like it created a whole new thing that had to be dealt with.
When I go to the battlefields, I don't really look at it anymore as, one side versus the other. I'm looking at young men.
Me too. Yes.
18, 17, 18, 19.
How old are you now?
I'm 51.
Okay, so I'm 46, and when I hit 40, I started to realize my mortality. And so when I'm looking at these guys as half my age, and I'm like, first of all, I feel like such a loser because I've done nothing yet with my life.
Right, I haven't done anything great.
And these guys have balls of steel, but I'm thinking of these guys lying in these fields, wounded or dead, and their children. I could be their father. I'm old enough to have been one of their fathers now, or someone that age.
On the field with them. That's what I tell my son. I'm like,
let's not go crazy here. I mean,
well,
no, I know what you're saying.
I tell it to my son. I'm like, we could have been out here at that time.
Yeah.
You and I could have been in a regiment together fighting this battle. I could have lost you that day. You could have lost me. We could have lost each other. But to take the broad look and go, well, this was Union. I was like, no, these were young men who got swept up in a politician's idea.
Yep.
And, you get a better perspective on everything. I stood in Bloody Lane in Antietam. First time I visited, I just stood there and just kind of listened. Of course, it was Labor Day weekend. You know what it's like.
Yeah.
Humid as hell.
Yeah.
But there was no birds chirping, no crickets. It was just dead silent. And I stood there for about 5 minutes and just tried to think of what those men were going through that day. Gettysburg, I go there and I spend a lot of time in Gettysburg on the south end of the field, Little Round Top, Devil's Den, Peach Orchard, the wheat field. And, I look at the open fields and I'm like trying to imagine what the town saw when the armies left.
Yeah.
The bodies everywhere. And it's like, Chickamauga was the same thing. I visited that. And, you look at these little pockets that were like in the middle of nowhere before. Did anyone hear of Sharpsburg before September 17th, 1862? No. Or Gettysburg before July 1st?
Maybe Gettysburg. Gettysburg was a modestly booming small town. It was a crossroads town. There was a lot of industry here. Maybe.
But these Manassas Junction, Shiloh, thousands of places from Pennsylvania, Virginia, down through Mississippi in Texas. And you realize these were all young men, teenagers, early 20s, had their lives ahead of them. And this moment happens and they're, we visit their graves. We talk about them. What did he say? The world will no longer remember what happened, what we said.
What we say here, but it can never forget what they did here.
Right.
Yeah.
he hit on the right line. Of course, we also remember the Gettysburg Address, but
Well, that's the irony of the whole thing.
right. But it's he was right. We remember what those men did.
Yeah.
How many of us? I mean, you're right there in Gettysburg. I stood there at the Virginia Monument with my son and said, "Well, this was the middle of Pickett's line. These men marched across that field to die."
Right.
And my son just looks at me and goes, "Did any of them chicken out?" Oh, I would have.
Yeah.
You'd have seen me marching backwards.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's amazing.
I know, and there had to be guys that chickened out, and I mean, they're human beings.
Right. But
no Confederate would ever have admitted to it, but
no. I wouldn't want to be in that front line, though.
I think I did read an account of one who realized the futility of the whole thing, and he just started walking backwards. And I feel like I don't know where I read that. I might be wrong on that one, but still, the point is, you have to assume, being that we're not studying Martians, we're studying other human beings from 160 years ago, which was not a very long time ago. We haven't evolved that much. And the fight or flight thing is still, it was just as real then as it is now. And that's going to take over for some people for sure. I would imagine probably more with the guys who were in the first day's fight over in the Pettigrew Trimble column, because those guys had already been through a shellacking on the first day.
By the time they arrived to the third day, they're just like, whatever. Just
it's really and I'm no Confederate sympathizer, but I'm a human sympathizer, and I don't, when I read about Pickett's charge, I just have to shake my head and go, what a waste! Like, what a waste of human life. And whatever Lee's reasons were, I have a hard time, forgiving's not the right word, but giving him a pass for doing it, because especially if it's true that if Longstreet's later accounts are true, that he told Lee, this ain't gonna work. If he really did say that, and if Lee trusted him and trusted his opinion, but went ahead and did it anyway, whether it was out of desperation or arrogance or for confidence in his men or whatever the case may be, somewhere in his mind, he's smart enough, he's experienced enough, he has to know that the odds are so against his men.
It's impossible. The more we study, and I went into my studies with this going, good versus evil, because we're taught that.
Right.
You start breaking down, you start looking at policies, you start looking at personalities and everything. You just come down and go, this is the only time America fought America. This is a truly American war.
Yeah.
And I just kind of tipped a hat. Memorial Day, Veterans Day, I just kind of sit back and I thank my great grandfather for being smart and walking away.
Yeah, right.
But I just look, I just look at it and just, I'm glad we never had a second one.
And I hope we never do.
No.
Yeah. I don't think people
realize.
To fight in it. Huh?
I'm too old to fight in it.
Yeah, and I'm too old to keep running away.
I'll take the Winfield Scott approach and go, I'm too fat to fight.
Yeah. I don't know if that would give you a pass these days.
I'll go join the Meal Team 6 and see what they're doing.
Well, all right. So we've gone all over the place on this one, and I unfortunately I have to wrap it up because I have another appointment. But
not a problem.
I want to know, in conclusion, though, your conclusion on the July 2nd early dawn attack order.
I don't. The order didn't exist.
Right.
We know that Lee's men said it didn't exist. I don't think an early attack would have made much of a difference. Meade's men had moved in overnight and kind of filled in the gaps along Cemetery Ridge. I mean, except for Sickles moving forward, but Dan's a whole nother subject.
Right.
Someone should do a Dan Sickles podcast just to talk about that man.
We've done a few. We had Jim Hessler on to talk about Sickles.
Oh, Dan is an interesting man.
He is.
I don't think an early attack would have made much of a difference. He still would have had the body counts.
Well, so I equate it to my answer when people say, if only Longstreet had allowed Hood to go around to the right. And usually that's how I can tell people have only watched the movie. And I don't use it. It's not an opportunity to mock them. It's an opportunity to teach people. And you go, well, what do you think would have happened if he had gone around to the right? He would have rolled up the line and won the battle. It's like, no, not really. Because here's why. Here's what you're not aware of. Here's what's behind the Round Tops. And here's what's coming up from Maryland. And Hood is turning his back and flank to those things.
Yep.
And so let's say he did that. And so now let's go to the morning. Let's say Longstreet was able to miraculously get his men, who weren't all up yet, down to where they needed to be in order to roll up what was the left flank of the line when the sun went down on July 1st and finish off the Union troops on Cemetery Hill. Guess who's coming up behind them?
Dan.
Well, Dan's already mostly up there, but you've got the 5th Corps, you've got the 6th Corps. The 6th Corps is the largest corps in the Army. Mm-hmm. You've got a lot of troops coming up that can just swallow you whole. So I don't know. It just would have changed the way the maps look today, but it still would have.
I don't think it would have mattered.
It wouldn't have mattered. Just the same as if Jackson were there. It wouldn't have mattered.
Meade had the best defense. He could move his line. He can move troops up and down that line to fill a gap.
Yeah. I really enjoyed this conversation, Scott.
Oh, I did too. I'd be happy to come back.
I would love anytime you want, whatever you want to talk about, just come back. It'll be a lot of fun. And when you're in Gettysburg, for sure, let me know when you're here, when you're coming at least, so we can go grab a meal or something like that.
We can't do Pickett's Buffet anymore.
Yeah. Well, there's a really nice buffet down at the old Boyd's Bear. I've only seen it. I haven't tried it yet, but it's beautiful. They did a great job down there. It's called the Barn Resort, and we can go down there if you want a buffet.
If you get a chance, check out the Civil War Lampoon page on Facebook.
I follow it.
Oh, we make fun of Pickett's all the time. It's one of our best jokes.
Yeah. It'll be missed when it's gone for sure.
My son actually, cast iron stomach, survived a meal there.
I have yet to. I used to get instant diarrhea. Sorry, audience, but I did. It was. But if I was ever blocked, I would go to Pickett's or KFC, and it would clear me out in less than a half an hour.
I know which one you're talking about. I've ate there a couple times.
Yeah. I also encourage everybody listening to check out Scotty J Presents the Civil War podcast on Apple and Spotify. And also, you might as well check out History Dweebs with Tim Scott, who recommended Scott come on the show here. Scott, thank you very much.
Oh,
and
thank you for
like I said,
me.
anytime you want to come back, let's do it again.
Sure, I'm up for it.
All right. And that's it here for us, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for listening and watching, and we will talk to you next time. All right. Thanks, Scott.
Oh, thank you. It was much fun being interviewed than being the host.
I got to tell you, I'm dying to do another person's show again because I like being the one interviewed too.
Yeah.
I get sick. Fun. I get sick of doing the interviewing, although I enjoy it, but there's some days where I'm just like this morning, I was supposed to have an interview, but the guy, it was going to be this way too over Google Meeting. And the guy, I guess had forgotten. And so he never showed up. And I was like kind of relieved because I was in a bad mood. And when I'm in a bad mood, I can't think of anything but what's causing my bad mood. So I'm not a good interviewer.
Right.
But if I'm being interviewed, it doesn't matter what mood I'm in. Once somebody starts asking me questions, it's easier for me to open up and kind of get out of it. So
yeah, I just have this part of my brain that's like old school entertainer.
Yeah.
I sit in front of a mic. The flip gets switched. I host a true crime with a friend, and we called ourselves the George Burns and Gracie Allen of true crime podcasting.
What's the name of that one?
We just switched the name. It's All Crime, Great and Small.
I true crime is my other favorite subject. I find it. I don't know why I'm drawn to war and crime, because I think I know why. I think the reason is because I can't understand either one of them.
Right. We just recorded. We break them up into parts depending on how big the story is.
Sure.
Well, we're working on Jerry Brudos right now, the foot fetish killer.
Oh yes, I'm not too familiar with that one, but I've heard the name.
Yeah, he had a fetish for women's feet and high-heeled shoes.
It's another thing I don't understand.
I don't mind a date wearing lingerie because it's nice. It spices things up. But when you kidnap women and make them wear it with high heels on, and you're taking pictures of it, and then you murder them,
yeah, it's sick.
You're sick. But then I'm from Illinois, so we've got.
Oh, you got John Wayne Gacy.
We got Gacy. We've got Richard Speck. We've got.
Oh yeah.
James Earl Ray was born in Alton.
What's in the water out there?
I don't know. It's. I try not to think about it.
Well, you also have, I mean, also like the Northwest. I mean, they had Ted Bundy, or the West Coast in general. You had Ted Bundy. You got what's his name?
Zodiac.
Zodiac. That's fascinating with Zodiac.
Right. Ed Kemper, the co-ed killer.
Ed Kemper, yeah. He's freaky. These guys. That's the thing. These guys are like. They're really sick, but it's just very fat. I'm sure you've seen the series Mindhunter, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was amazed at how close they got their Ed Kemper to look. And
sound.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, really, really good. Really good casting on all of them, really.
They had Jerry Brudos in one episode. He was like fondling a high heel shoe while they were talking to him. He's like,
"Oh, yes. I remember that." Okay, I didn't realize that was him.
Yeah, he was very. They did more with Kemper because he was willing to talk to them.
Wait, didn't they do the shoe with Kemper too? No,
which one?
Kemper wasn't the shoe. They didn't do that with Kemper as well, did they?
Oh, Kemper just murdered women because he hated his mom.
Yeah,
and he also shot his grandparents when he was a kid.
Yeah, he had some problems.
Yeah. Abandonment, father abandonment issues. But we talk about, and I'll actually, after we get done, talking about whoever, I'll actually sit there and go, okay, what drove this guy?
Yeah.
What caused this guy to? My big thing is what makes a cult leader attract people like this? Jim Jones, Manson.
Well, that's the thing about cult leaders. That's another thing that my best friend and I, every time there's a good cult documentary, we tell the other one, you got to watch this one. This is something, right? Because we can't believe how dumb people can be. And you notice this, though, that these cult leaders, they get away, like they attract all these people. They can, a lot of them convince husbands to let them sleep with their wives, all this, and none of them are good looking.
No, they're not. They're ugly guys.
So how the hell does an ugly guy convince all these people to give him his money or their money to give up your wives? I mean, like it's astounding to me.
It's got to be the charisma. If you can talk a good game, because there was a podcast I listened to called Promised Land. It was about the People's Temple.
Yeah.
And they used actual recordings of Jim Jones in the story.
Yeah, yeah.
You listen to this man talk. I was about ready to go. I was working at Walmart at the time. I know you're dead, but I'll come follow you, Jim. Yeah.
Really? See, I've heard that, and I'm like, these are the ramblings of a lunatic. Same with David Koresh.
Yeah.
There was one. There was one on. I can't remember if it was HBO Max or Netflix that I watched in this past year. And I can't remember the name of the cult, but it was out in California, and it started as this like self-help thing for addicts.
Oh, okay.
And then it turned into this crazy cult, as they always do. And, you know, of course it fell apart and everything like that.
Oh,
and
it always does.
But I don't, I look, I could talk a great game, but I could never get people to do those things. I could never bring myself to even try to ask them to do anything like that. Like I would, people have said to me, you should start a ghost tour company. And I'm like, why? It's all bullshit. And they're like, yeah, well, so what? Make some money. And I'm like, no, I can't make money lying to people.
Right.
Like, I know every day that I'm making these stories up and I'm telling you them that they're true. I'm telling them to you like they're true, but I know they're not. I can't do that. I can't look you in the eye and take your money and say thank you. So, like, I know that I don't have it in me to do that, no matter how good a game I could talk. But on the other hand, I've been really low in my life and depressed and lonely and this and that and the other thing. And I never once thought to go seek out a cult or even church. Like, it's the groupthink that scares me.
You know,
I don't get it.
Having a schizophrenic father taught me a lot of stuff as a kid.
Okay.
He to this day, he believes that he's God's messenger on earth.
Yeah. They all love that.
They fixate on something.
Yeah. And
a lot of times it's the Bible. I've kind of come across this. And Dad, you know, one of my aunts had told me that he's kind of been a little evil since he was a kid.
Yeah.
But to listen to him, I heard this growing up, so I kind of got that built-in detector. And you'll sit there and start rambling about God, and I'll just go, well, you know, ancient Egyptians believed this, and they were before Jesus, so who's right and who's wrong? Or he'll go on. He's
what would he say to that?
He knows that Bible forward, backward. He'll tell you there's messages in there written just for him. And I'm like, yeah, okay. Like the guy sitting around, you know, in 1000 AD, we're like, hey, Steve Fenton's going to be born in,
yeah, right.
In 950 years. We got to put these messages in here for him.
Right. He needs to know.
But he's always, not only is he schizophrenic and like attached to the Bible, he also is looking for a leader to be like his he's focused on televangelist when I was a kid. Jim Baker, Pat Robertson. Now it's Donald Trump.
He's a televangelist?
No, but he's
no, they need a charismatic leader.
Yeah, they need a leader, and you know, we don't talk for obvious reasons. And I just go, man, I am so glad I just have depression and not schizophrenia.
I'm telling you. So you mentioned the word evil before, and I'm curious to know what you think about this. So I've always had this, not always, but I've recently developed this theory that what we call evil is really ancient people's way of describing mental illness.
I've seen it. Because if you think about it, and my mom and I was just talking about this morning. You know, up until like 100 and so years ago, we were sticking mentally ill patients in insane asylums because we didn't know what they had.
Right.
You know, you look at someone like Joe Kennedy, had his daughter lobotomized because she was acting a little slutty.
Yeah.
You can't have, you're from a good family. You can't act like that.
Yeah, well, the men are doing it.
Well, right. But I mean, my friend and I, we really want to do an episode on Chappaquiddick because it's just amazing.
That would be interesting.
I've got the book sitting here on my shelf somewhere.
I saw the movie when it came out a few years ago, and it really pissed me off.
Yeah, I've got a book on the incident itself, and then I've got a biography of Ted.
Mm-hmm.
And Chappaquiddick's a whole chapter in the book. But you start looking at, like, even my mom said she had an aunt growing up who was Down syndrome.
Okay.
They called her mongoloid back then.
Right.
But you have families that would take these kids and lock them in the attic.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Lock them in the basement, lock them away in an insane asylum, and never talk about them.
They didn't know what to do with them.
Right. And we, looking back, you really don't see evil popping in until around like medieval times as a social construct for bad behavior. Because I mean, you had, people who did good things, people who did bad things.
Sure.
But just like evil itself, the kind of like the umbrella term.
Well, yeah, but I think that when you look at specific cases of particularly murderers or just antisocial people, they all, now a lot of them we would call schizophrenic or, psychopaths or whatever.
Some could be bipolar.
Right. But when we didn't have those words and we didn't have that understanding, I think people would have just said that that's the devil.
You're evil.
Yeah. And
the devil.
Yeah, and I think it's a sick brain that's doing it. It doesn't necessarily mean their heart is sick. It's just that their brain is sick.
No, there was something in the brain chemistry that made them act out in this. I don't understand this. I'm going to act out in this particular manner because it makes me feel good.
Yeah.
It takes away that feeling for now.
Yeah, exactly.
And then when the feeling comes back, this is how I know to deal with it.
Yep. Yeah, it's so that'd be interesting. So what's the name of the true crime podcast again?
All Crime, Great and Small.
All Crime, Great and Small. All right, cool.
I'm just staying busy to keep the depression at bay.
Oh, that's what you have to.
You're right.
But there comes a point where it gets so big that you feel like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders, and when the return isn't commensurate with the input that you're putting into the thing, it starts to weigh on you, and you start to, at least I do. I start to think, oh God, this isn't working anymore. What am I going to do? Other than this, I can't think of anything else to do. I love doing this. I don't know what else to do.
I do this. Scared. I do my 2 shows. There's like a couple topics I'm debating on, wanting to revisit again and do a show. I collect my monsters. I collect superhero figures for the stop motion. I color. That helps out a lot.
Yeah, I paint.
I'm debating getting into painting miniatures.
That is something I don't have the patience for, but I'm more of the broad strokes guy than the detail guy. Yeah.
My kids are in their 20s, so I'm free time.
Yeah, well, that's the problem. Is I like oil paints, and oil paints are, you don't just like stow them. I mean, you stow them away, but when you got an oil painting, you don't just like put it in the closet because it's still wet. So you got to leave it out. You got to have space, but you also have to have time, and inspiration. So it's tough. Anyway, I got to get going, but right. I really enjoyed talking to you. And
not a problem. It's great.
We'll do it again. And Tim's show is History Dweebs, right?
Yeah.
Next time you talk to him, please thank him for recommending you.
I will.
And ask him to contact me if you don't mind.
Okay.
All right, cool. Thank you.
No problem.
I'll talk to you later.
All right.
All right, bye-bye. And goodbye to you guys. For now.